Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for September 29th, 2023. I'm Benji Fisher, moderating and sharing my screen. Also present are Simo Helston, who will start off the conversation, Aaron McHale, Lauri Escola, Offer Schall, and Ralph Kohler. So we're starting with issue 3389200. Field selection breaks conventions and increases cognitive load. So go ahead, Simo.
Yeah. So this came up that this field settings are going to be changed, and there is some ideas how to change them. And when I started looking at how it's implemented in the dev branch at the moment, I noticed that it's kind of quite confusing, in my opinion, because so it's kind of I've been talking about the conventions and the perception a bit. So I look at the current state in dev, and I see that there are radio buttons that are singular radio buttons that are not connected. So I see that it's kind of just grouped by one radio button by one. So it's kind of breaking the convention of having a kind of a list of radio buttons and how they are usually arranged.
By the way, I have a sample Drupal site here. I'll paste the link into the group chat. The username and password are admin, and we can use that to see a live version rather than relying on the screenshots. So I think this is the page we're talking about, right?
Yeah. And it's this page is something that it's kind of the grid extends so that if you have a wide screen, then it extends up to 4 columns, and then narrow, then it's down to 2 and 1 column. So the kind of the alignment of the radio buttons that kind of changes depending on the way the screen size. So it's kind of if it's just 1 column, then it's kind of a little bit better, but even still, when I look at this one, I see that maybe if you hover on one of the items, so it's quite discrete, the hover effect. So here it would be much more like maybe invert colors or something, like it would be a stronger effect. But what I'm thinking is that it kind of feels very much extra to have that radio button there, because it doesn't feel like a group where you select one and it's kind of it doesn't really give information, that radio button. So clicking that, it just selects the radio button, and it looks like more like a radio button now, but it's kind of I think it's very much confusing, because it doesn't look like the items that are close to the radio button don't look like radio buttons. And here, when the items, the next step goes way back down there below, so it's a kind of lot of space in between those options. And also, if you maybe choose file upload as a field type.
Here it is.
Yeah. Oh, maybe Boolean. Sorry, Boolean.
Sure.
Yeah. So there it's kind of this is more clear because it doesn't have any additional options. But then if you have something like maybe number, then you have a lot of different options, and they are quite far from your selection. And also here, the radio buttons are even further away from each other than in a kind of in the type selection. So this is kind of something, it's very hard to see them as a group of radio buttons, and that's kind of how radio buttons should work.
And I also notice an inconsistency here. In the first set of choices, the radio buttons are all to the right. In the second set of choices, the radio buttons are on the left. I wonder if that was intentional. Before we go any further, I think the larger question and the reason we specifically asked Larry to join us is that this change went into Drupal core without any input from the usability team. There were some comments on the issue from Roy Schulten, and I think there was a promise of rapid further development and addressing some of the usability issues that Roy pointed out. Larry, would you like to say something about that process before we go any further? Oh, your audio is terrible. You sound like
Oh, can you hear me now?
oh, that's
Is it
much better.
better?
Yep.
All right. Sorry about that. So I do want to give some context to where we came up with these designs. So we did around I think we did 4 rounds of user interviews with 6 users per round. And we were really struggling to find a design that would rate well in those interviews. And this was the only design that received some level of positive response from users. So that's kind of how we ended up with these designs. There are some compromises still that are less than ideal. Like, don't think we necessarily wanted to use the radio buttons for as a long-term solution. We had a hypothesis that we could potentially convert these into more like links, so that but that would actually depend on some of the other work that we are doing before, where we would be converting the whole process into a modal. So basically, yeah, we're making good progress on the work to make the modals work, and after that, we might have one opportunity when, or that would be at least an opportunity when we could try to improve this.
Okay.
About the radio buttons, I do want to say one more thing. It's not like a completely new pattern in Drupal 4, because of the media library uses a similar pattern to this, and that's kind of where that's where we kind of copied the idea from. There could potentially be some improvements that we could do to improve the clarity, but we did not see any challenges across the different rounds of usability testing that we did related to that.
When you say the media library uses a similar pattern, I don't see radio.
So that would be on the media selection widget, like when you are in opening media library, for example, through CK editor or an entity reference using the media library widget. That's when it would, provide a checkbox as part of the card.
So for example, in here, I shouldn't be editing Spanish, but is this the page you're talking about? I'm editing and I choose to add a media
They have
item.
checkboxes.
Checkboxes rather than radio buttons. Aaron, you have a comment you want to make or a question?
Hi. Yeah, just kind of following on from Laurie there. I remember, I think in a previous meeting we sort of talked about this, and I know I was definitely in favor of the kind of modal multi-step form approach. So making each one a link, and then you click on the the link for the one you want, and that takes you to the next set of options. So yeah, I'm definitely a fan of more iteration in that direction. And I think, swapping out the radio buttons for these being links would be a really positive change, I think.
When
That's
I
still on. I just want to add one more thing, that's still on the roadmap. It's just that some of the work to actually enable the models to work has taken a little bit longer than we anticipated in the first place. So that's why we did not see as much of rapid iteration on this.
When I was looking at it, I just made some copy paste of HTML with those inspector on browser and added change a few pieces of CSS and or deleted actually a few lines or added. So I made a kind of a what it would look like if those options would be like if they would open like right next to the selected field type. So that's one issue that it's so far away. So it's kind of very easy to lose focus what's happening, and especially because kind of there are some of them are quite similar, so you don't maybe even see that they changed between, I think, was it number and selection list. Yeah, maybe choose selection. Oh no, maybe was maybe plain text and formatted text. I think some of them were very similar.
So if I choose plain text, I get these two options down here.
Yeah.
And if I choose formatted text, I get three options.
Yeah.
Which are sort of similar variations on formatted text to
Yeah,
the variations on plain text.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't see that no, but I think there was some of them were a little bit. So it's not so obvious that the things under like here below change, especially on if it's kind of a yeah, if it's something that you if you have a narrowest screen, then you don't see that things are changing. So I think one thing would be to add kind of move that chosen option, just move it around depending where the items are. But I was also thinking that instead of radio buttons, it would be in a way a step towards a modal. If we started looking at these each option as a kind of a separate card, and then kind of it could be done so that we could have details element for each of these, and then inside the details are the options. Because here we are kind of having kind of extra input option here because we only choose the option, and option kind of defines which type of field it is. So it's kind of excessive. So we could I don't know how the plan is going to be, but we could reduce some stuff that feels like extra.
So first of all, I'd like to point out a few minutes ago, Quinn Pham joined the meeting, and just now Thomas Howell joined us. And I think I want to focus less on the drawbacks of the current way it works, because Larry has indicated that that they are planning to replace this with something very different. You know, it's a little surprising to me, and I think to several of us, that this got committed to Drupal core along with its plan to make changes. But you know, as Larry is the project manager, that's his call. But you know, let's not focus too much on the way it currently works, but let's think more about where it's going, and assume that we will have some sort of modal interface in time for Drupal 10.2. And Larry, can you confirm that the plan is to have that done in time for 10.2?
So I don't think we have a commitment that we would have the model done by 10.2. There's a good chance that it will get done. It depends on whether the blockers get done on time, but at the moment we are estimating that they would be done by 10.2. but just saying
Sorry?
that it's hard to make a commitment on the timeline. What I do want to highlight is that we have validated that the usability of this should be superior over the experience that we replaced with this, so that it's not a UX regression from any perspective over what was there before. So even though it is not ideal, it's still an improvement over the status quo, and that's why we decided to go with it.
Okay, so you're saying this intermediate stage is, in your opinion, already an improvement. And I understand you can't make a commitment. We understand how open source development works and how Drupal development works. You can't make a commitment, but certainly the goal is to have something different for Drupal 10.2.
Yeah, that's at least the aspiration.
So did you conclude that this is better for creating content types with lots of fields by a experienced user? Because for me, this felt like a very slow way, or more kind of slower way to do things. But that's just because I'm used to the other one, because it has less steps than this one and less movement between, like, around the screen. So did you have a kind of what kind of a set of tests you had for tasks you had for the testing?
Yeah, so we did testing with 6 users on each round, where half of the users were experienced users and half of the users were users who are new to Drupal. And this was one of the designs that received better results over the beginning, or over the starting point, consistently across the 2 groups. So that's how we decided to go with this. I do have to say that there is some things that we know about site building, which is that in some cases, a lot of the content modeling is done outside of Drupal, and that's particularly true for experienced Drupal developers or site builders, where they would maybe use spreadsheets or some other tools to define the content model beforehand. And then they would just simply insert or enter that content model to Drupal. So that's something we heard from users, and we did have some users who are accustomed to that kind of workflow, or using that kind of workflow in the day-to-day basis, even though we had not tested for that use case. We did get positive feedback from them as well. But yeah, I have to say that in the use case that we had, we wanted them to do the content modeling itself to think about which field type they need to select in this interface, not in a stage that is happening before.
Yeah, and another question that kind of felt overwhelming in this interface is that instruction text for some of the items that it's kind of overlapping some of them, and different kind of not uniform. So is this text something that's is there a process for reviewing this text, what it's ideal and what something requires, and this kind of what is efficient? So is there some kind of a process for developing those texts?
So there's an issue. We did want to review all of the text. So not all of the text have been favored before. We updated kind of the most glaringly incorrect texts or most confusing texts, and there's certainly no we are very open to changing or revisiting any of the texts that are still in there. So maybe we can start filing child issues or child issues to that issue. So that's what the parent issue that we have. So that there's something like review UI texts for field UI or something like that. So if you have any
Your audio is garbling again.
or want to work on that, I think it would be very great, that type of contribution. It is
So the issue that added this feature is 3389200. Oh no, I'm sorry. This is one that CMO added. The one that added them was 3356894. Make field selection less overwhelming by introducing groups, and that is a child issue of this plan issue to improve the field creation experience, which is, for the sake of the recording, 3346539. So can I find the issue for updating field text as a child of this or related?
It's a child issue of one of these issues. Maybe it is the previous issue. The one that actually implemented the grouping.
Pasted the refined field descriptions link.
So this one. 3370326 to refine field descriptions. I don't see any activity there. So I'm also concerned that if the modal version of the process does not make it into Drupal 10.2, but then makes it into Drupal 10.3, say, that will be changing the whole user experience for adding fields for one version of Drupal and then changing it again, which seems problematic. But then also thinking about how this is going to work as a modal, one problem with that is that it seems to me that it will add an extra click. If I choose plain text and then these options appear in a modal, and I say, maybe I don't want plain text, I want to look at the options for formatted text, I first have to make a click to dismiss the modal, and then I can click on a second one and see the options for that. Although perhaps a fix for that would be to have some sort of navigation within the modal to switch from one of these to the next.
I think not seeing the options right away is especially difficult for that selection list, because I think that's in a wrong place, because selection list has plain text and numbers. So if it's at all possible, it would be really nice to move the selection list options under plain text and numbers.
Aaron, go ahead.
Thanks. One of the reasons I'm so keen on the modal approach with like a multi-step flow is because I've seen how this can work in other systems, and I think it works really well. Actually, I can share my screen just to demonstrate the project how it's done in the project Home Assistant, because I think that would be a good example. Let me just find the button to share my screen.
Always a challenge.
Sorry, I've just come back from holiday, so I'm still a bit slow. Yeah, I'll just okay, so like I think you can see this.
Yes.
Basically what we're looking at here is in Home Assistant, they have the concept of helpers, and you can decide what type of helper. So it's very similar to selecting a field in Drupal. So you can say this is a modal here for create helper, and it gives me all of these different options. And if I click on one like button, it's going to take me to the second step where I can give it a name and an icon. But I can also click back if I want to go and select a different one.
Yeah, so this is just to illustrate that this is the kind of thing I'm imagining in my head how it would ultimately end up coming together in a model. And I think this is actually quite good because it doesn't, it doesn't overwhelm you with too many choices on one screen. So yeah, I just wanted to show that because I think this could be a good pattern to follow, which I think is what the plan is anyway.
This is very similar to what we are planning for
Yeah,
the ideal experience.
yeah.
I guess going back to this page, when you click create a new field, that's when the modal would pop up, and it might have a similar structure to what Aaron is showing. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot. I'm not sharing my screen anymore.
Let me stop sharing and you can reshare. Yeah. There we go.
And again, the Zoom UI has its problems selecting. Although maybe this is the system component that gets used by Zoom. Anyway, so I'm sharing my screen again, I think. So maybe at this point, clicking the create new field button is what would open the modal and have an interface, something like what Aaron was just demonstrating, rather than going to this page. Is that the idea?
Exactly. Not sure if that came through. I tried to say that, yes, that's what we were thinking.
Yeah, we did hear that. Thanks. So, one thing I'd like to have is some more communication. We have this plan issue. I commented on it a few weeks ago and didn't get any reply there. And with all the activity going on and the promises of further iterations, we'd like to have some more visibility into that. And this group does care a lot about this feature and the work going on. We'd like to help if we can, and we'd like to see the progress that's being made. So if it could be in the comments on these plan issues or somewhere else, we'd like to have more communication.
Yeah, I think that's fair feedback. I think we could provide an update on the issue. The comment, I was actually on holiday probably when you posted a comment, but I'm not sure why I didn't see it after I came back. So yeah, I can certainly update the issue, and I think it's a good time to do that before the 10.2 release, so that we can then collaborate on the remaining issues.
Yeah, and
issues
10.2.
like the
Go ahead.
Issues like refining the UI text and doing UI refinements, like what Simo has been recommending. I think it's a good time to do some of those. So this we do have I do have my colleagues working on this or available to help with any of the work until the release of 10.2 at least. So we can work as a collective on these things.
Right. And 10.2 is supposed to be released in December, but Alpha 1 is scheduled for the end of October. So I think that's probably the deadline for major changes like this. Possibly the beta 2 weeks later, but there's not a lot of time.
I do think that the modal-based approach probably needs to be done by beta, but some of the things like changing the UI text probably could be done later.
Oh yeah.
During the cycle.
Yeah, but sort of replacing all of this with a modal probably you think can be done in the beta. I was thinking by the alpha, but it's only a 2-week difference anyway. Go ahead, Aaron.
Sorry, I'll let Laurie finish.
I just wanted to say one more thing, that there's already people working on making this work with modal. So it's not like work that we would be just starting now.
Yeah, we understand.
Thanks. Just one thing that I know has caused some confusion is the label field. Because it's quite easy, even from using this interface myself, and I've heard other people have commented that the label field is really easy to miss now because your attention is drawn to the big grid of options, and so on quite a number of occasions when playing with this, I've completely forgot to fill in the label. And I suppose in this modal new sort of model approach, I think that the label field could probably be moved to a later step. So I wonder if that's something that Laurie is being planned or looked at as well.
Yes, it's one of the reasons why we are doing the model-based approach, or that is one of the problems that we want to address with that as well.
Okay, cool.
Because it did come up as part of the research as a challenge, but it was like kind of listed more as an annoyance rather than an actual bug that would prevent people from using it. But we do want to make it convenient as well to use. So that's why it is something we do want to address, definitely.
That would be good.
If I remember correctly, that specifically was pointed out by Roy on the issue that implemented this. Go ahead, Thomas.
Sorry that I got into this a little bit late today, but the question I have is what's going to happen both in the modal in the modal instance, assuming that the work is done in time, when Contrib is adding additional field types?
So Contrib has APIs to provide similar kind of new listings here as Core does. So we've been collaborating with modules like Paragraphs and others to make sure that they group their fields correctly in this UI. If they are not adding, or like if they are not providing a group or adding to an existing group, they would be shown towards the end of this list until they.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Will they show up as like a custom group or some such? So I'm just thinking of all of the customers that I saw in support who had custom field types that they just kind of created in custom modules, and they're adding it onto sites. And I'm just wondering what the impact will be for the existing base, as well as how we're going to guide people to do things ideally in the future.
Yes, so they will show up in here, so they can continue to use the interface. It's just that they would just show up as similar to the link, but they would not necessarily have so that there's no items that would show up below that when you click them, because they're ungrouped field types, and they might not have the icon or the description as well. But that's not going to be a regression over the existing UI, because even in there that you could not show an icon or description. What you might be losing is that if you provided a group before, that group could not be used anymore in this new UI, because we've had to change the mechanism that we used for the grouping, and because of the previous groupings were not matching how we wanted to group the fields, so how we believe users mentally map the fields.
So are you saying that there's going to be one more item in this grid for default, and when you click on that, you'll see all the available ungrouped field types? Or are you saying that all the ungrouped field types will show up on the same page as this grid?
They will show up on the same page as this grid as individual options.
Really?
Yes.
I'd like opinions from the group. I would think it would make more sense to have a default option here, just in terms of consistency and to reduce clutter. So I would, that's the way I would have thought to design it. Do other people have opinions on that?
I have two opinions. My opinions are yes and no. In general, it's always a very bad idea to have a kind of general group or kind of something that everything falls under. So in general, that's a bad idea. But here it would be something that kind of would help, not like it kind of would help not losing kind of the whole page to those options. So in general, it's a bad idea, but in this contexts, I think it would be something that kind of would the benefits would override the kind of the problems.
And Thomas, I think you were next.
No, Ralph is.
Okay, Ralph. Ralph, are you muted?
Sorry, apologies. Thank you. I'm not sure, somehow it might be a reasonable step to sort of indicate which card or element is basically a group and which is an actual field. Because, for example, the Boolean, email, and link, none of those have basically follow-up options, and it is not directly apparent to someone. And if those custom fields get in as well, then it might be confusing. Or if those are combined as a group and then you have those single ones, it's suboptimal from my point of view.
All right, so just to be clear, I'm using my browser tools to suggest that, you know, the last item on the list could be a default. Probably wouldn't want the link icon. And Ralph, you're pointing out that this really is just a single option rather than a group. So in that sense, it is consistent to have other single options added to this list. Thomas, go ahead.
So if we could ensure that 100% of what people have already added or would want to add would be single option options, then I would agree with that point. But just because they might be like Boolean doesn't mean that they are or will be. So from my perspective, I'm still worried about the issue of too much noise or too much clutter. Additionally, I'm worried that we need to, if we're grouping things in such an obvious and visible way, and it's a deliberate action that's being taken to ease the cognitive load, I'm wondering how we can train people to know that when they are adding either from Contrib or from local custom installs, when they're adding field types, that like how do they know when to add it to plain text, or not, let me pick number for instance, and when they need to add it as its own thing. It feels like it makes the assumption that the initial developer of the site, so the consulting firm that built the site, will be there to maintain the site after it's been released to a maintaining or owning company. And that doesn't seem to be highly sustainable. And it's just because we're making things so visual this way, I'm worried about changing what's already there without covering for those use cases, and then ensuring that we have an easy way for people to know this is how they should be managing these things. This is what's expected.
You know, I'm not too worried about the decision of whether to group or not. That is up to the person who writes the contrib or custom module that provides the field. And presumably, when they see what happens, they'll realize, oh, I should implement this new API and put it into a group. And then which group they put it into is up to their discretion.
But
they're
all.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Thomas.
You were already, like, the statement was made that we're not able to carry over the existing groups that people have already implemented. So what I'm saying is we are ungrouping their stuff by making this switch. So let's propose I am Acme Corp, and I've got a website, and I've added 3 groups that each have like 3 or 4 variations per group. When this change goes into effect, because the old grouping does not carry over to the new grouping, that deprecation means that they're now going to have 12 new field types added in a huge list. They're no longer going to be grouped after the change.
I see what you're saying. So the old grouping, can't really demo it because I don't have a site with an older version of Drupal handy. But the old version does have some grouping. For instance, all the reference types are in one group. But go ahead, Aaron.
Thanks. I would not recommend introducing some kind of like default group. I think it could create more confusion for people who are not familiar with this interface, or are for sites where fields haven't been, field types haven't been grouped in using the new approach. I think it's okay to have like custom fields or contrib fields where we're just displaying until they're appropriately grouped. And I mean, it's not like I'm trying to think of like a situation where a site would have like created lots and lots of field types. I think it's I don't think that's necessarily I mean, somebody please feel free to provide another example, but I can't think of a situation where a site would have like a massive amount of custom field types, or they might have obviously contrib modules to add additional field types like paragraphs. But I think the risk with having like some kind of default group is it just encourages people, or it makes it easy for people to like use that as a dumping ground, whether in custom or contrib. And I don't think that's a pattern we want to encourage, is the creation of a dumping ground, because that's just going to make it like harder to find the field you want to find. Like if we would always be creating like a 2-tiered set of fields, like the fields that are here nicely grouped, and then all of the other fields. And I just think that's not going to result in a great experience for people.
Okay. Simo? Simo, you're still muted.
Yeah, so this is not about the same topic, so this is another one. Do we still talk about the default option? Because I was
Well, let's wrap up that discussion. I'm getting the impression that people don't like the idea of the default group.
Yeah, and I do want to highlight that the reason why we do not have a group for the leftovers is exactly what Aaron just said, is that first, if we don't want to promote the idea of having the group as a place where you can just dump your things, plus also the goal was to have all of the groups and all of the field types be clear, regardless of in which stage you are at. And that would go against that, because if it's a general group, you would not know what you actually have there. So you would have to open it to know what you have in there. But and here, like with the groupings, it's the first decision that you make. It should always get you to the right direction. So you should not have to just have like the kind of browsing mindset should not have to apply on this page. Obviously, like people might not always make the right decision and they have to go back and redecide, but that was the goal, that they would not have to test the groups, and they could make the decision already at this point.
Okay. Yeah, so that is resolved. Drop that suggestion and go ahead, Simo. You want to talk about something else?
Yeah, so this is actually, I think it might be also a usability issue, but especially I think accessibility issue. But I was wondering when to start checking this for accessibility, because one thing I noticed here, because just trying something out, I noticed that because of it's using radio buttons and that are put in a grid, it's kind of a conflicting for keyboard navigation. So for a grid, keyboard navigation should be up, down, left, right. But here, when you press down, it goes left, and when you press up, down goes right and up goes left. And so that's kind of something that's it's defined. I don't know the level of the recommendation or pattern, but kind of there is this kind of layout grid
So
pattern.
let me see. I'm using the keyboard now, and I'll hit the down arrow. And it's basically a one-dimensional list rather than a grid. And if I hit the right arrow, I get the same thing. Oh, that's interesting. So right and left arrows work as expected, but up and down arrows do not, because it's not a true grid. Not quite sure what I did to get this error message. But let's see, I think Ralph was next.
In regards of the keyboard navigation, I think it's not really a problem for screen reader users, because they get announced the type of context they're in, basically radio buttons. So they know which keyboard navigation that applies here. But I consider it more a problem for sighted users, because for me, for example, when I saw those cards, my first initial idea was I would be able to tap through those, basically from label to plain text to formatted text to number and so forth. But you get from label to plain text and then to the continue button underneath. And the expectation switches there, and you have no cue by, for example, an assistive device that you're in a different context here. When, in case you don't realize, like me, for example, that those are radio buttons, and therefore the keyboard navigation is sequential.
So my initial question was, what is the correct time to start looking at those issues?
I think it's worth reporting these issues, because of then we at least know to look for them when we do the model-based approach, to make sure that they get addressed in that. Yeah, so feel free to open any issues that there are with the current implementation, because they are valuable already from that perspective.
And new issues should probably be children of this plan issue.
Yes.
Aaron?
Thanks. Yeah, I would actually, I guess building on what Ralph was saying, but I would actually say I think it is even more of a problem for screen reader users, because from sort of initial testing, I don't believe it's apparent that by selecting an option, there are additional options that appear based on what's selected. Like as you're tabbing through, a screen reader user is probably just getting the information from that radio button. Like right now you're on plain text, so it'll announce your plain text, but they're not going to know that there is additional options below to choose from. And yeah, Ralph's confirming that. So like it's potentially quite problematic, the radio buttons, for users of screen reader users. And that's something that we could potentially fix with ARIA labels or etc., like ARIA tags and things. But I do think that the modal approach, or well, not necessarily the modal, but changing to a multi-step flow with using links is going to be way more accessible, because you'll get to like plain text, you'll activate that, you'll click like, and then you get to a new form that's then, okay, now I'm selecting my the next set of options, right? So that's going to be way more accessible for anyone using a screen reader, I think.
And Simo in chat suggests that a details element would be an improvement here. Rather than, I think, rather than having things show up down below, make this a details element that will open up although I can see that would be very challenging in terms of the layout.
Yeah, I just to respond to that as well. I don't think a detailed element is a good idea here, because what's going to happen is if you open it up, the things inside it are either going to be really small and really cramped in there, assuming the layout doesn't change, or the layout is going to reflow, which means that like it could be a lot of visual noise, for lack of a better word, for people who just for certain users, like if you're, you know, if you have a visual impairment or if you're neurodivergent and you struggle with like a lot of cognitive overload, that could be a lot of things moving around, you know, the layout reflowing, expanding, contracting. That could be quite challenging, I think.
Yeah, Ralph? Still muted.
Sorry, one additional point in regards of screen reader announcement is also because you show it right now, Benji, in the context, for example, of reference, and the additional options, you have content, user, basically the labels for them. But if you change, for example, to, let's say, selection list, then you have the description for the list text, for example, values stored, text values, for example, USU states and so forth. But per default or automatically, those bullet pointed lists aren't announced. You just get list text, list integer. So you not necessarily look for more with a screen reader. So that might be also a point.
And probably those accessibility issues will still be there when everything switches over to the modal interface.
Yep.
Just guessing here, but it seems likely.
Just note that for reusing an existing field, we already have a modal, but it's kind of a very plain. There is like that next to create new field, that button, reuse an existing field, is already a modal, so it's kind of it's fitting.
Right.
Just to
I recall that there was a significant improvement in reusing the field a few months ago, something I had an interest in for a long time. We are getting close to the end of the hour. Aaron, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just real quick. I think just what you were saying, Benji, I think if the modal approach, but if it's combined with using links instead of the radio buttons, that potentially could address the issue, because then the browser isn't trying to just like, I haven't looked at the markup, but semantically, like if everything is wrapped in a link, then everything is just like paragraph elements with links, right? So the browser will just read everything out in theory.
I'd like to return just for a minute to the question of what happens if the modals don't make it into 10.2. I've been focusing on the user interface, but I guess behind that is the API additions where contrib module developers have to specify a group and an icon for the field that they create. And I guess that is going to be stable as we move from this to the mobile approach. Larry, can you confirm?
Yes, yes, and that's specifically the reason why I wanted to work on this was because of the modal work is heavily blocked by other work, and we wanted to introduce this API earlier rather than later in the release cycle, so that at least the most prominent contrib modules could be updated to update their groups before the release. So the API itself is stable, but the UI would have to change.
Right. And I wonder, so I guess it's not likely that this will be reverted if the modals aren't ready in time, but I wonder if it's possible to make this an option, like in the user interface, to tell people, oh, try out the new experimental UI or stick with the old one. You know, the same sort of thing that that Jira does when it introduces a new feature. It would probably introduce its own group, Larry says in Slack. I'm not sure what that refers to.
That was in response to Ralph's earlier comment about geolocation. About experimental field UIs, I think it's going to be challenging for us to revert the changes because of, I mean, it could be done in theory for sure, but it's not straightforward as just reverting one issue, because it's a complex set of issues that are, it's multiple issues that are modifying this.
And the API is stable at this point.
Yeah, I do want to highlight that the field UI is technically a module that is optional. So we could provide a contrib module with the 10.1 snapshot of the field UI. And it would probably be easier than reverting the core changes.
Okay, and we are at time. So thanks all for the discussion, and I'm sure we'll return to this in the near future.
Yeah. Thanks for all the feedback. I do want to highlight that there was a lot of valuable insight for us, and also highlights how critically important it is for us to get that model work done.
And let me just quickly read these two comments from the chat. Quinn says, glad that we go with the modal approach because modals focus user attention on a specific task. I also like the versatility of modals, which can display various fields as shown earlier. The user can click the back button to go back and select another option. And then Aaron's comment, he suggests perhaps a core experimental module. But we are a minute over. So again, thanks for coming, and we'll be back next week.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Nice weekend.